Hello, I'm going to talk to you about what to do about your suffering from an organic intelligence perspective. I'm Dr. Bakho, PhD. On the slide here, we have four items. Number one, orientation. Number two, pleasure. Number three, any port in a storm. Number four, wait and conserve energy. So say someone messages you something and you're hurt, you're suffering. The preferred way to feel better is orientation, connection to the environment through the senses. Orientation reduces intensity, whereas pleasure is more liable to kick up intensity, which makes it more likely that you'll swing to unpleasant intensity, more suffering. So if you can, orient. If you can't orient yet, then you pursue a pleasure until you can orient. Eat something, call a friend, exercise, watch a show, etc., to feel better. You could count orientation as a pleasure. It promotes feeling better, but orientation is a more neutral experience, while pleasure, as I'm using it here in number two, refers to a more activating, pleasant experience, or a deactivating one that gets you closer to neutral, at which point you may be able to orient. So eating gives you pleasure and settles you to a point where orientation becomes possible. If pleasure is not possible, then you find any port in a storm, any source of relief or escape from suffering. For example, suffering is intense, you don't know what to do, and you find yourself driving to a movie theater, going in and watching a movie, which gives you some relief, some escape from your suffering. Or you go get a massage or call a friend or an emergency appointment with a therapist. And these things give you some relief. Any port in a storm falls under pleasure, pleasure in the sense of any feeling better, including feeling less bad. But any port in a storm feels more like an emergency. I need to find any kind of relief as opposed to feeling like pleasure in the ordinary, this feels good, I'm having a pleasurable time sense. So watching a TV show and feeling pleasure, enjoying the show as a way of settling from the suffering would be number two, pleasure. Watching the TV show while suffering, not really enjoying the show, not really feeling any positive pleasure, but feeling some relief, some escape from suffering would be any port in a storm. So the difference between pleasure and any port in a storm is a matter of degree. And arguably, any pleasure will to some degree be a port in a storm because we're dealing with a situation of suffering as opposed to pre-existing comfort. You got the message from someone that caused suffering, a storm. So you find pleasure or a port in a storm, and those may be the same thing with just differences in degree until you can orient. Now, if you can't find any port in a storm, then you're waiting and conserving energy. The suffering is happening and you're waiting, not making it worse than it needs to be. You're conserving energy until one of the other three options becomes possible. Any port in a storm, pleasure, orientation, with orientation being preferred. Conserving energy will lessen the duration and intensity of suffering. And the energy you saved can be used for any port in a storm, pleasure, or orientation. Waiting and conserving could count as pleasure in the sense of feeling less bad, minimizing pain. You're choosing the least unpleasant route, waiting and conserving. So you could reduce all four items here to pleasure in the sense of following whatever feels better, including less bad. But I recommend reducing, if you want to reduce, to the two of orientation and pleasure, not lumping orientation under pleasure, because of how fundamentally important orientation is as an intensity stabilizer, right? You want to draw on these four things: orientation, pleasure, any port in a storm, wait and conserve energy. You want to draw on them moment to moment in life according to what's possible. So you get the message from that person, you're suffering, you try to orient, look around, hear what's around, let the eyes go where they want to go, and say it works. You're feeling a little better. And maybe you go for a walk, and that makes orienting a little easier. Then maybe orientation suddenly stops working. You're suffering upsurges suddenly, and orientation isn't cutting it. And it upsurges so intensely that you feel you can't find pleasure or even any port in a storm. So you just wait and conserve energy. Maybe there will be some wiggle room about what feels better during the waiting. Maybe there will be some degree of any port in a storm. Maybe laying in bed with the TV on feels slightly less bad. Maybe sitting indoors or outdoors, maybe walking while suffering deeply, waiting and conserving energy. Then suddenly say there's an upsurge of pleasure and it's pretty intense. This does happen. Someone's depressed and suddenly out of nowhere, they feel the urge to write and they start writing and it's gloriously pleasurable for hours. They feel intense pleasure for hours and then the depressed state returns. So during those hours, really enjoy the pleasure. And then you go back to a more depressed state, but suppose you find that your eyes can connect to the plants outside the window. So you look at the plants. Orientation, which reduces the pull of interior intensity. And then suppose you think of lasagna and you start looking at pictures of lasagna and feeling pleasure. Feel the pleasure. And then suddenly more suffering comes and your attention is pulled back inward. Too intense for orientation, pleasure, any port in a storm. So you wait and conserve, which arguably is the port in the storm, waiting and conserving. So the distinction between pleasure and any port in a storm, and between any port in a storm and waiting and conserving energy may not always be sharp. The main point is to follow what feels better, including less bad.